All right, we're going to go way back, over 450 years, in fact, to a battle you've probably never even heard of, the 1558 Siege of Narva. Now, I know it sounds a little obscure, right? But trust me, this wasn't just some forgotten medieval skirmish. This single event, well, it was the key that unlocked the door for a massive empire. Just look at this. This is the scene from the spring of 1558. We're not talking about a small fight here. This was an all-out assault. I mean, you can practically hear the roar of the cannons, right? The clash of steel. For the people trapped inside those walls, this was their world literally crumbling around them. So, that brings us to the big question, doesn't it? Why? What on earth made this one city so important that a rising empire would throw everything it had against its walls? Well, the answer, it tells us a ton about how power, trade, and just plain old geography can completely change the course of history. Okay, so to really get a grip on this siege, we've got to zoom out a little bit. Because this battle, it didn't just pop up out of nowhere. Think of it more like a single spark that ignited a much, much bigger fire. Yeah, this was no isolated attack. The Siege of Narva was actually one of the very first moves in this huge conflict called the Livonian War. And when I say huge, I mean it. We're talking about a brutal 25-year-long struggle between Russia, Sweden, Poland, and a bunch of others, all fighting for control over this one critical slice of the Baltic coast. And right smack in the middle of it all? You guessed it, Narva. You can see it here, located in what's now modern-day Estonia. Back then, it was a key city in the Livonian Confederation. And its location, it wasn't just a point on a map. No way. It was a massive strategic prize sitting right at the crossroads of major trade routes and rival powers. Okay, so now that we've got the big picture, let's zoom back in. Right back to the city walls where two major powers are about to go head to head. So, in one corner, you've got the defenders, the Livonian Confederation. Think of them as this sort of old order of knights and merchants. And in the other corner, the attackers, the super ambitious, fast-growing Tsardom of Russia. You know, this was really more than just a battle. It was a clash between the past and the future. So April 1558 rolls around, and the Russian army shows up. They completely surround the city. Nobody in, nobody out. All the escape routes and supply lines were cut off. The siege was on, and for the people inside, the clock was officially ticking. And listen, this was not your typical swords and arrows kind of fight. Oh no, the Russians brought the big guns. Literally. We're talking the absolute cutting edge of 16th century military tech, massive siege cannons. Just try to imagine what that was like, being trapped inside those walls. Day after day, just this constant, earth-shaking boom as those weapons pounded the fortifications. For weeks, the city somehow managed to hold out. But under that relentless, non-stop bombardment, something had to give. You could feel it. The breaking point was just around the corner. And when it came, it was fast, and it was brutal. The Russian assault finally broke through the walls. The Livonian defenders, totally outnumbered, were just overwhelmed. It was over. Narva had fallen. And just like that, the map was redrawn. By May 1558, Narva wasn't a Livonian city anymore. It was now a strategic outpost for the growing Russian Tsardom, their first real foothold on the Baltic Sea. So, Russia won the battle. But that brings us right back to our central question. Why did this one victory matter so much? What was it about the city that made it the key to an empire's ambition? Okay, so here's the deal. The real prize, it wasn't the city itself. It was all about one word: access. For the very first time, Russia had a major year-round port on the Baltic Sea. This was basically a superhighway to the west. Goods, new technology, new ideas, they could all suddenly flow in and out from big Russian cities like Pskov and Novgorod. This wasn't just a military win, you guys. This was a full-blown economic revolution. But here's the thing about prizes that valuable. Everyone wants them, and they're never easy to hold on to. Russia actually controlled Narva for 23 years before it was captured by another rising power, Sweden, in 1581. The fact that these huge empires kept fighting tooth and nail over this city for decades, well, that just shows you how unbelievably important this little spot on the map really was. So yeah, the battle for Narva was fought with cannons and swords over 450 years ago. But the struggle for strategic ports, for control of trade routes, for those vital borderlands, that story is absolutely still being written today. And it really makes you think, doesn't it? What are the Narvas of the 21st century? And what conflicts will they ignite?